Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election in the state of Georgia. I'll be covering the recent polling data we have out of the state, talking about what I think is happening here, and giving my broad thoughts on the election as it stands today. And again, we have 39 days to go till the election. I'll be posting at the very least 5 times a week. And I'll be covering in depth the most important states. So do subscribe to the channel so you make sure you don't miss any of my uploads. It's going to be very important, and I will be obviously doing videos like these in the future. So with that being said, let's get into it. Fox News, last night they released a poll. Kamala Harris, 51%, Donald Trump, 48%. This is a surprising poll. I think this is the best nonpartisan poll arguably Kamala Harris has gotten out of Georgia. Fox News is an A-rated pollster. They're pretty nonpartisan. Obviously, the common misconception is that because the network leans right, the polls tend to, would lean right. But in reality, Fox polls are actually very nonpartisan. And in 2020, they actually underestimated Donald Trump, not Joe Biden. So this is a good pollster. It's a quality pollster. And when they release a number, it's always good to factor that to your analysis. So this is obviously a very good poll for Kamala Harris. Not only is she up by a margin that's slightly bigger than the margin of error, but she's actually past 50%. She's at 51% of the vote. So even if she lost all the undecideds, of which there's only 1% in this poll, she'd still win the election, and she'd do it by 2 points. So that is a very good sign for her. And it's kind of the latest in a string of good news for Harris in Georgia. If we take a look at the polling data we have here right now, Donald Trump still leads by 0.8%, but his lead has really shrunk in half just in the past couple of days. That's because we've been getting better polls for Harris. In the Bloomberg likely voter undecided push, she was tied, and then in their other weighting, she was up by 1. YouGov CBS had her down by 2, obviously, which wasn't good for her, but Fox had her up by 3, which I think is better. And again, this is more of a B pollster. Fox is an A pollster as well. Marist, we saw they had a Harris +1 vote in the registered voter screen, then a Trump +1 in the likely voter screen. And then NYT Siena obviously was pretty good for Trump, but they were also good for Trump last time. And what we see is that broadly, in recent polling data, Harris has been doing better, and she's been closing the gap. And Georgia is a state where Democrats can actually count on, potentially being down in the polls, maybe by a little bit on election day, and being able to win it. This isn't a state like Wisconsin where usually Democrats are going to underperform their polls. Georgia, historically, Democrats have beat their polls. And in 2020, as I'm going to show you, which was a year where in 49 out of 50 states, Donald Trump outperformed his polling average. 2020, Biden, he underperformed his polling average, but only by about a point. These polls were quite good, and they pretty much nailed, a very slight Biden advantage. That's exactly what manifested on election day. And so what we saw was that we kind of had a wide range of polls. SurveyMonkey, literally the day before the election, had Biden up by 8 in the state, but then obviously Trafalgar had Trump up by 4. So, obviously, we got a wide range of outcomes here. But the good polls, they did show a pretty close race, albeit one that maybe narrowly favored Joe Biden. And that's what ended up happening. And then in 2016, the polls had Trump up by more than he won the state by, although it didn't matter because he still won it by 5. And then most recently in 2022, if we look at this Senate race, Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock, on election day, no one was close to 50%. So in a way, the polls were right that there was going to be a runoff. And in their runoff, the polls did favor Warnock, and Warnock did end up winning that race by 3%. But on the polls on election day, Walker had, a lead of 1%. So, I'd say by all means, is it possible for Democrats to beat their polling in Georgia? And we saw it in 2022, we saw it in 2018, we saw it in 2016. In 2020, the polls broadly were pretty good, right? So there's not a huge record of Republicans being down in the polls and coming back to win Georgia. There is, on the other hand, a record of that for the Democrats. And by the way, I didn't even mention the 2021 Senate runoffs where Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock both started out trailing in that race. They came back. They were essentially tied in the polls on election day and ended up narrowly winning. So that's another thing to consider. But Georgia's had a crazy amount of Senate races in the past just 2-3 years. So forgive me for forgetting to mention that. But again, if we take a look at Fox's poll specifically, just to kind of look at how they did, just scrolling down here, Fox News, they had Warnock up by 1 in their final poll. And obviously, I would have liked them to do one more. This poll came out on October 30th. Maybe they would have done one more, and they didn't really push undecideds here. But they showed that Raphael Warnock was up by 1. So they were quite good in 2022. Now, this is not to say that we can look at past polling misses and use that to predict, down to the 10th percentage place, right? Or 10th place. I shouldn't have said 10th percentage place, but down to the 10th place, right? We can't use it to predict a polling error because polling errors don't repeat themselves. And I use this example every time I talk about the polls, right? If we talk about the polls, if I'm running a poll and in one election I underestimate Republicans, the next election I'm likely to try to fix my mistakes or overcorrect. Because again, there's more of a penalty for being wrong the same way twice in a row than being wrong the other way. So polls do overcorrect. We saw it to an extent in 2022, and in 2024, we could see this again. So again, by no means am I saying we can look at the polls from 2020 or 2022 and use them to predict how off, say, Fox News' poll is going to be this year. What we can do is observe a pretty clear pattern in a state of Republicans not being able to outperform their polls. And that's why a 3-point lead for Harris in Georgia, if this was the average, he'd pretty clearly be favored here. And so that's why this poll is so significant. We see a state where Democrats have historically done fine relative to their polling data. And we see the best poll that's come out in a couple of days shows Kamala Harris at the 3-point advantage. So let's talk about Georgia now. Let's talk about the specifics of this race. I'm going to kind of use this as a segue to analyze this state. Now, Georgia is very interesting. And the thing you'll notice right off the bat about Georgia is that it's kind of similar to Arizona in the sense that the majority of the vote is concentrated in a small part of the state. In the Atlanta metro area, you have 55 to 60 to 62% of the vote, depending on the election, comes from this metro area. And obviously, I don't just mean downtown Atlanta. I mean the suburbs and the exurbs that combine to make a very big metro area, one of the biggest in the Deep South. So this is interesting to me. Republicans in Georgia have a very fundamental problem in that they don't win the necessary number of voters in the suburbs federally. Now, the suburbs, especially in Atlanta, and obviously when I say suburbs, the majority of that electorate is composed of voters outside of Atlanta, right? These voters are fine voting for Republicans down ballot. Republicans have done really well in statewide races here that are not federal. So basically any statewide race is not a Senate race, essentially. They've done well. But in Senate races, they've lost again and again since 2016. The last time Republicans won a Senate race here in 2016 was with Johnny Isakson. And Johnny Isakson, unfortunately, has since passed away. So that was politically 8 years is an eternity, right? So we have to consider that. And they've had chances. Republicans lost a pair of Senate races in the 2021 runoffs, and then in 2022 they lost again to Raphael Warnock. So since 2016, Republicans are 0-3, and Democrats, by the way, have also won the presidential race here since 2016. They're 1-0. So in federal statewide races, Democrats are 4-0 in Georgia in the past 8 years. So Trump has to do something that Republicans haven't been able to do since 2016, which is convince voters in the suburbs to vote for a Republican. And I think Georgia is a state that's uniquely bad for Trump because you have a lot of voters in the suburbs who are very conservative. They like to vote for Republicans, but the issue is that it gets harder for them because the Republican Party has become associated with a lot of socially conservative policies. We talk about the Dobbs decision. I think that decision probably cost Herschel Walker this race in 2022. Obviously, I can't prove that because I can't go back in time and run an election where Dobbs didn't happen. But what we saw was that abortion was a huge, huge issue for 25-30% of the electorate. And you had a lot of voters outside of Atlanta who maybe didn't like the Biden administration, didn't approve of Joe Biden, certainly, but didn't vote for Herschel Walker in part because of the abortion issue. And so that hasn't gone away, right? Donald Trump, or Democrats have really tried to hammer Donald Trump on abortion. They've tried to make this campaign a big chunk of it, at least, about abortion. And so if you watch the debate, which I think most of you did, right? Kamala Harris talked a lot about abortion. And what I noticed was that the language she talked about Trump abortion bans, because her argument is that Trump appointed the justices that struck down Roe v. Wade. And so if people believe that, if that argument is compelling to these voters, Harris will do well. Because again, we saw in 2022 that voters were willing to prioritize social issues over the economy. In the Georgia exit polls in 2022, we saw that voters did not like the Biden administration's handling of the economy. They did not like a lot of the votes that Raphael Warnock took. but they did not like Herschel Walker's stance on abortion, and that to them was more disqualifying. So that is what matters here. And Trump, he has a slight advantage in the polls right now, but a big reason that I'm skeptical but calling him this huge favorite in Georgia, the way a lot of other people are, is that do we really think that voters who didn't vote for him in 2020, who didn't vote for Herschel Walker in 2022, are going to come back and vote for Trump this time? Maybe some of them will, but I don't think enough of them are going to. And this state has gotten bluer since 2020. We saw that in 2022, the electorate per exit polls was actually Trump +5, and Warnock won the runoff by 3, so we saw an 8.0 performance for Democrats. It's likely the Republicans aren't going to have that same turnout advantage this year. So let's just say the environment's even. Let's say it's a 50-50 electorate from 2020. If you extrapolate the overperformance that Warnock saw, Harris would win by 8. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen, and exit polls are far from perfect. But again, Harris +8, there's a margin for error there. And again, this is a state where Democrats or Democratic-leaning groups have moved in since 2020. We've seen the rate of education go up, and obviously we know voters who hold bachelor's degrees are more likely to vote for Democrats than Republicans, especially in 2024. So demographics, I think, favor Democrats here more so than they did in 2020, although the difference is marginal. And so that kind of brings me to my final point here, which is that Republicans actually need to, I've talked about the suburbs, mathematically, Republicans actually need to gain back ground in these areas, and they've grown since 2020. Now, a big thing that Democrats have going for them here is that, like, obviously they're winning these counties in suburban Atlanta they didn't used to win. Mitt Romney won Gwinnett County by, this is, I think, the best example of this. Mitt Romney won Gwinnett County by 9 points. And in 2020, Joe Biden netted, a solid 75,000 votes out of here, which was, he won the state by 12,000 votes. So do the math, right? Like, Biden netted like 5 times, really more than that, like 6 times his vote share just out of this one county that voted for Mitt Romney 8 years prior. So that really matters. And Democrats are winning, I think Cobb County is similar, as well as Newton County. These are all Romney. I think at least some of them are Romney counties that obviously voted for Joe Biden by pretty considerable margins in 2020. So that's a big advantage Democrats have. And Kamala Harris likely win these counties. And if Democratic turnout's good, she'll net even more votes. But the real reason Republicans don't net as many votes in Georgia anymore is that the exurbs have also gotten worse for them. Cherokee County, which Mitt Romney, I think, got like almost 80% of the vote in, or I think Forsyth got almost 80% of the vote in. Trump got only 66%. And this is a county that Republicans used to net like 60, 70,000 votes out of. Obviously, to be fair, I don't think it's actually that much because the county's grown a lot in population, but relative to the state, they used to net more votes. Trump got 66% here, and he only netted 43K. If you ran this election back in 2012 and just if in 2012 the same number of votes were cast in Forsyth County, Romney would have netted like 15, 20K more than Trump. And again, Donald Trump lost the state by 12,000 votes. So literally, I am not exaggerating when I say that what happens in every individual county literally does matter. Because again, if you kept the turnout of the state and gave Trump the Romney percentage in this one county north of Atlanta, he literally would have won Georgia by 8,000 votes. So these things do matter. And the fact that Republicans lost here in 2022, they lost again, is concerning for them. So this is all to say, like, look, Donald Trump can win Georgia. It's a state he lost by 12,000 votes in 2020. It's a state where Republicans have been polling okay, right? Like, they have a 1-point lead, which is obviously a good thing for them. But really, my thought about Georgia is that Harris is underrated here. Democrats have done well in the suburbs. They've been on a winning streak. Republicans haven't given us a reason to believe in their ability to win back these voters. And if we see Donald Trump's approval ratings continue to decline, if we see the Republican Party continue, or if we see Democrats being able to continuously, effectively tie Republicans to issues like abortion, that's going to hurt them here too. So again, this is all to say it's going to be close. And I'm not going to give like a definitive, I know who's going to win Georgia today prediction, because that would be unfair. I don't know who's going to win Georgia today. And I'd be lying to you if I was like super confident about that. But we do know that there are a number of obstacles that Trump has to climb, and I think that's important to highlight. So let me know what you all think. Let me know who you think is going to win Georgia. Give me suggestions for videos that we're going to do in the future, and I'll see you all in the next one.